If you enjoy real-life scary story, creepy encounters, and unexplained mysteries, then subscribe the channel so you never miss notification of new video. Now, let's get into tonight's story, one that will make you think twice before booking your next Airbnb. I wasn't looking for an adventure, but that's exactly what I got. After a long week of work, I was desperate for some time away from the noise. I needed something quiet and relaxing, so I decided to book an Airbnb. I had heard great things about a place in the small town of Saugerties, New York, near the Catskills. The cabin looked charming in the pictures, rustic, tucked away in the woods, and advertised as the perfect spot for people looking to disconnect. It seemed ideal. No hustle, no noise, just nature. I should have trusted my instincts when the host, a woman named Sarah, seemed too eager to make the booking happen. Normally, I'd expect a little back and forth, but she was almost overly accommodating. She was quick to approve my reservation, and within minutes, I had the keys sent over with specific instructions. "The place will be ready for you, don't worry. You'll love it. Let me know if you need anything," she wrote. It was a 5-hour drive from my place, and by the time I arrived, it was late, almost 9 p.m. The town of Saugerties itself was quiet, almost too quiet. The roads leading out of the town became narrow and dark. The GPS led me further into the woods, where the cell service began to drop. When I finally reached the cabin, I immediately felt the eeriness of the place. It was tucked behind a thick line of trees, with no other buildings in sight, making it feel isolated. The cabin looked just like the photos: wooden exterior, a stone fireplace, and large windows that should have offered a great view. The problem was, the closer I got, the more I noticed things that didn't quite add up. For one, the porch light was flickering, and the whole place looked almost too still. No movement, no sounds of birds or insects. It felt like I had arrived at the edge of the world, but I brushed it off and went inside. The inside was just as described: cozy, rustic, but there was an odd energy in the air. The smell of wood and fresh linens mixed with something that felt off. A quiet hum buzzed from somewhere in the back of the house, and I could swear I heard a door creaking faintly, as if it were opening and closing by itself. I dismissed it, figuring it was just an old house settling, but the feeling of being watched lingered. The instructions Sarah left me were simple: make yourself at home, enjoy the serenity, and lock up when you leave. But she had warned me to avoid venturing too far into the woods at night. There were wild animals, she claimed, but I felt there was something more behind her words. I didn't want to overthink it. So, I unpacked, settled down, and cracked open a bottle of wine I had brought. At around 11 p.m., I decided to take a quick walk around the cabin. The moonlight was bright enough to see through the trees, but the silence was overwhelming. I walked toward the edge of the forest and noticed something odd. There were footprints. They weren't mine, too fresh, and they didn't seem to lead anywhere in particular. They just appeared in the dirt, leading toward the woods. My stomach twisted. I knew there were no other houses around here, and I hadn't seen a single person on my drive up. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, but something in me told me to get inside and lock the doors. I wasn't sure why, but I obeyed. When I got back to the cabin, the door to the room at the back was slightly ajar. It wasn't when I had left. It looked like someone had been in there, though I couldn't understand why. The room was small, almost like a storage closet, and there was nothing of interest inside, just dusty old furniture covered with sheets. But something felt wrong. It didn't seem like the kind of room that was meant to be explored. It felt like a room hiding something, like it was keeping a secret. The next few hours were filled with strange occurrences. The hum I had heard earlier grew louder. It was coming from the basement. I went down to check, only to find it locked. The key was nowhere to be found, and as I pressed my ear against the door, I could hear faint whispering coming from within. But it wasn't clear, just muffled voices as if someone was talking softly in another language. I texted Sarah, trying to stay calm. Me: "Hey, is there anything about the basement I should know about? The door is locked, and I hear some strange noises coming from it." Her response was quick, but vague. Sarah: "Oh, nothing to worry about. It's an old house. Things just creak. Just get some rest and enjoy the night." But something about her message didn't sit right. I hadn't heard back from her since. No follow-up. I felt the urge to leave, but I had already settled in and didn't want to overreact. I stayed up, scrolling through my phone for something to distract me, but the eerie feeling never left. It wasn't until about 2 a.m. that I heard the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside my room. Slowly, they made their way down the hall and then stopped right outside my door. I held my breath, staring at the door handle, half expecting it to turn, but it didn't. Instead, I heard a faint scratching sound, like fingernails against wood. It lasted for what felt like hours, but eventually, it stopped. I don't know how I managed to fall asleep, but I woke up the next morning with no clear memory of how I had drifted off. The strange occurrences didn't end there. I tried to pack up and leave as soon as possible, but when I went to the car, I found that my tires were slashed. Someone had been tampering with my car. I immediately called a tow truck and told them I needed help. I kept my phone close and stayed inside the cabin, afraid to leave, unsure if I was alone. By the time the tow truck arrived, there was no sign of anyone. The police that came later found nothing unusual. No footprints, no evidence of anything, just the damage to my car. The officer assured me it was probably just some kids messing around in the woods. But I knew it wasn't just that. When I tried to contact Sarah to ask if anything weird had happened during my stay, my messages went unanswered. I checked her Airbnb profile again and noticed something strange. She had only been hosting for a few months, but there were several canceled reservations under her name. The reviews, which once seemed perfect, now looked suspiciously fabricated. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in that cabin. And the worst part, I still don't know what it was that was watching me. If you ever find yourself booking an Airbnb in Saugerties, New York, especially in the woods near the Catskills, be cautious. There's more than just the wilderness out there, and some secrets are better left untouched. I travel a lot for work, so I'm pretty used to staying in Airbnbs. Some have been great, some a little sketchy, but nothing truly weird until last summer, when I stayed at a small rental outside Asheville, North Carolina. I was in town for a conference at the Harrah's Cherokee Center, but downtown hotels were way out of my budget. So I found an Airbnb in a quiet wooded area near Black Mountain. A small, modern A-frame cabin. The pictures looked great, and the reviews were solid, though the host, Daniel, had no profile picture. That was a little weird. But people are private sometimes, so I didn't think too much about it. I got there late, around 9 p.m. The house was exactly as described. Clean, modern, kind of cozy. The door had a keypad lock, and I got in without a problem. Inside, everything seemed normal. I dropped my bag, made some tea, and flopped onto the couch to scroll my phone. That's when I noticed something strange. On the tile floor near the kitchen was a wet footprint, just one. It wasn't soaking wet, but it was definitely there, like someone had stepped in water and then walked inside. I checked my shoes, dry. The doormat, dry. There wasn't a single wet spot anywhere else. I tried to shrug it off, but something about it made my skin crawl. I messaged Daniel, just letting him know I arrived. No response. Whatever, maybe he was busy. I turned on the TV for background noise and settled in for the night. But then, around 11 p.m., I heard it. A thud from upstairs, which was weird, because there was no upstairs. The listing had mentioned a lofted bedroom, but this sound came from above that, like another floor I wasn't told about. I paused the TV and listened. Silence. Maybe something fell. Maybe the house was just settling. I forced myself to ignore it and went to bed. But at 2:47 a.m., I woke up, not because of a noise, but because the motion-activated nightlight in the hallway had turned on. I stared at the doorway, heart pounding. Those lights were supposed to turn on only when someone walked by. I grabbed my phone and slowly, carefully, panned my flashlight across the room. Nothing. But then, I looked at the floor. 2 wet footprints. Fresh, facing my bed. I stopped breathing. I swear, I felt something watching me. My fight or flight kicked in, and I bolted, grabbed my bag, ran out the door, and jumped into my car. I sat there, shaking, doors locked, headlights on, engine running. I didn't go back inside. When the sun finally came up, I forced myself to go in, just long enough to grab my things. I nearly convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing, until I checked my phone. Sometime around 4 a.m., I'd gotten a text from Daniel. "You weren't supposed to stay there." I left immediately. Later, I looked up the address, just out of curiosity, and that's when I found out. The property was real, but it wasn't owned by Daniel. In fact, the real owner hadn't rented it out in over a year. There was no record of an Airbnb listing, no reviews, no host named Daniel. So who let me in? And who or what was in that house with me? I had been planning a solo trip to New Orleans for months. The city's rich history and vibrant culture had always fascinated me. To fully immerse myself, I decided to book an Airbnb in the French Quarter, aiming for an authentic experience. After browsing through numerous listings, I found a charming, historic apartment on Royal Street. The host, Marie, had glowing reviews, and the photos showcased a cozy space filled with antique furniture and classic New Orleans architecture. Upon arrival, the narrow streets buzzed with life, and the scent of Cajun cuisine filled the air. I located the apartment building, an old structure with wrought iron balconies draped in hanging plants. Marie had provided detailed check-in instructions, and retrieving the key from the lockbox was straightforward. Entering the apartment, I was greeted by high ceilings, exposed brick walls, and large windows overlooking the bustling street below. It was exactly as pictured, if not better. After unpacking, I decided to explore the neighborhood, indulging in beignets at Café du Monde and strolling through Jackson Square. As evening approached, I returned to the apartment, exhausted but content. I settled into bed, the distant sounds of jazz music lulling me to sleep. Sometime during the night, I was awakened by a faint creaking noise. At first, I dismissed it as the building settling or perhaps an old pipe. However, the creaking persisted, seeming to move from the living room toward the bedroom. My heart rate quickened. I reminded myself that old buildings often make strange noises. Gathering courage, I got up to investigate. The apartment was dimly lit by the streetlights outside, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I checked the living room and kitchen. Everything appeared normal. Just as I was about to return to bed, I heard a soft whisper, indistinguishable but undeniably human. Panic set in. I quickly turned on all the lights, searching every corner of the apartment. There was no one there. I even checked the locks on the doors and windows. All were secure. Trying to rationalize the experience, I convinced myself it was just the city's lively atmosphere playing tricks on my mind. The next day, I mentioned the incident to a local tour guide during a ghost tour. He chuckled and said, "The French Quarter is full of spirits. Many old buildings have their own stories." While his comment was meant to be lighthearted, it did little to ease my unease. That night, I was determined to get a good night's sleep. I ensured all doors and windows were locked and even left a light on in the hallway. Around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and unmistakably coming from within the apartment. Fear paralyzed me. I listened intently as the footsteps approached my bedroom door, stopping just outside. Summoning every ounce of courage, I called out, "Is someone there?" Silence. I grabbed my phone and dialed Marie's number. To my surprise, she answered on the first ring. I explained the situation, my voice trembling. Marie sighed and said, "I was hoping this wouldn't happen again. Previous guests have mentioned similar experiences, but I thought it was just their imagination. The building is over a century old, and some say it's haunted." Frustrated and scared, I asked why this wasn't disclosed in the listing. She apologized, explaining that she didn't want to deter potential guests with unverified stories. I spent the remainder of the night wide awake, every creak and whisper amplifying my anxiety. At dawn, I packed my belongings and left the apartment, opting to stay in a hotel for the rest of my trip. Reflecting on the experience, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in that apartment. Whether it was a restless spirit or just an overactive imagination, I couldn't say. But one thing is certain. My stay in that charming Airbnb on Royal Street was an experience I'll never forget.